So as you know, we've just introduced you briefly to Kalisa, and you got to see a very nice slideshow of some of my colleagues. We're going to tell you a little bit about yourselves. We're going to have an icebreaker, which Mosa is going to do. And then we're going to explain why Kalisa used WhatsApp data. Going to have a break, and then reflections and scenarios, which is Mosa again, and then Carol is going to tell us how to analyze the quantitative data, and I'm going to deal with some of the questions and comments. Right, so let's get going. Next slide. Okay, so there you have us. Okay. So altogether, 335 participants registered today for this session, and here's a little bit about you. There's slightly more women than men, 188 to 147 men. Next slide. And the participants who registered come from 63 countries. There are 335 of you. So you can see Africa is extremely well represented, but we also have Asia, Australasia, North and South America, Europe. Next slide. And the majority of you are evaluation practitioners, almost 180, and also the majority of you are from NGOs. So that's interesting, but we have government employees, academics, private sector, researchers. Okay, that's good. So I'm going to hand it over to Mosa, and where she'll do the mentee icebreaker.
Okay, thank you very much, Jane. And again, once again, welcome to our Kalisa webinar data on WhatsApp. And so, as we mentioned, we need you to bring your phones a little closer because it is a WhatsApp webinar, of course. We need you to go to www.mentee.com. Once you are there, we need you to enter the code that is currently playing on your screen. The code and the link are also in the chat box, so you can also copy them directly. You are going to go to mentee.com, that is MENTI.com, and use the code 12404233. The code is also in the chat box as well as the link. Find us at Mentee, and this is the first exercise for the day. You know, when we were compiling this, we thought it was really important. It's probably the hardest thing you're going to do for the session because it'll help us assess how hard we need to work today. So really, I encourage you all to apply yourself because, you know, they asked me, said, Mosa, please take it easy on them. And I said, I make no promises because we need to know how hard we need to work. So please go to mentee.com, 12404233. How many participants do we have coming in? Okay, we have 52 participants. Wow, okay, this is going to be interesting. So now that we have our participants, I'll wait a few more seconds for others to join us. Yes, I see all kinds of emojis. Thank you for joining us on our WhatsApp Kalisa analyzing workshop, WhatsApp analyzing workshop using the data from WhatsApp. We really do appreciate you being here. So join us on Mentee, use the code on your screen. It's also in the link. Okay, please join us. Is everyone ready? A few still joining us, interesting personalities coming through. Welcome to the workshop. This is the hardest exercise you'll do, I promise you that. Okay, so now that we have our participants, I think we can roll. Or should we wait a few more minutes? Phew, everyone is still coming in, slowly coming in. We're going to mentee.com and we're using the code in the chat box, and we are choosing our avatars, and we are about to assess how hard we need to work today. Thank you very much for joining us. The time is exactly 2:20 in South Africa in the afternoon. It's winter time, so you can also share your time and where you are joining us from while we wait for everyone to join us. Oh, and we are joining the platform. We're joining the platform. And if that is the cue, I think I can move right along. Okay. The first question. Everyone's ready. The point is to answer quickly and you get more points. This workshop is about using what as a data source. 15 seconds to answer the question. I want to know if you know you're in the right workshop. This workshop is about using what as a data source. Time up, and great. I'm glad we all know we're about to use WhatsApp as a data source for evaluation. Well done to you all. The second question. Oh, that's the leaderboard, because there's so many of us, we had to take a minute to calculate all of that. So the quickest answer, 1, and I see Lerato's in the lead. You can still beat Lerato. You can still beat Lerato in the next question. Let's find out if you're awake. Question 2 of 2. The quickest fingers win. Remember that. What year was WhatsApp invented? What year was WhatsApp invented? Someone said, as the years go by, we no longer ask what year, we ask where were you when this was invented? So maybe that'll jog your memory. And time's up. So many answers, and the correct answer, of course, is 2009. WhatsApp was invented in 2009. And how many of us got that wrong? I see we had 99, we had 2005, and we had 2011. Correct answer is 2009. And who's in the lead now? Whoa, and congratulations to Puffy P for winning this round of quiz. The next questions are more multiple questions, and it's just to gauge where you guys are and how you guys are feeling about the workshop. Which emoji best describes how you're feeling? So here I would like to see who's also fluent in emoji as I am. I see a few faces that are happy. I see a few people that are nah, not so much. A few people feeling like I'm ready to learn. And if you're feeling a bit down, I hope that the next few hours, few minutes you spend with us today will make you feel better. And if you are the last one on the right side, they say it makes the world go around. So we truly are happy to see that. Okay, so we all speak fluent emoji. Great. And now I want to see just how fluent your emoji is. Is it C1? Is it A1? Is it B1? Let us see. Odd emoji out. Which one is not an emoji? Option 1, option 2, option 3, or 4? Who knows the emojis well? Which one is not an emoji? I see competing answers here. I see the others are more fluent with emojis than others, but no worries. In this workshop, we will sharpen all our WhatsApp skills. And the correct answer for this one, actually, it is a trick question, but the correct answer is option 2. Option 2 is not an emoji. It is a graphic, it's an image. And then I want to see who does use their WhatsApp more regularly. So I need you to spot the WhatsApp blue tick. Okay. A few, trick question, I told you. Option 1 to 4, which one spot the WhatsApp blue tick? And the correct answer, of course, is option 3. The 2 ticks do belong to WhatsApp as the official WhatsApp blue tick. Okay, so now that I know we don't really need to work as hard and that we do know our way around our WhatsApp, we can move on to the next part of the presentation. Thank you so very much. And I will be catching up with you in a few minutes.
Back to the presentation, please. There we go. All right. Back to our technological issues, hopefully not. There we go. There's our mentee icebreaker. Next slide. And so one of the things we'd like you to do right now is let us know in the chat box how you or your project or program currently use WhatsApp. We'd be of interest to that. Okay, next slide, please. So we did during COVID a massive evaluation of a project called the Reading Support Project working here in South Africa. We did a design and an implementation evaluation, and USAID has kindly agreed to let us use this case for this session. Right, let's go to the next slide. So essentially it's a $5.5 million project, and it was targeting approximately 255 low-income rural and urban schools to reach 1,530 teachers in the foundation phase, which is grades 1 through 3, and focusing on learning to read in both Setswana and in English as a first additional language. So the program did teacher training, it provided learner and teacher support materials, it provided management support, it provided coaching and classroom libraries. And in terms of the Reading Support Project, it was intended as a part of the government's Early Grade Reading Study 1. They did 2 studies, one in Northwest, which is the province we were working in, and the other one in Mpumalanga. And they were set up as a randomized control trial. So that's why the treatment and control are not the same. And the purpose is to improve the quality of teaching and learning. In South Africa, well over 70% of all children finishing grade 3 cannot read for meaning. And so it's a huge focus. So kindly, the Department of Education worked very closely with the project and with the evaluators. And here you have an example of how the project worked. So we had treatment and control schools. The treatment schools had both coaching and senior management training or team training, 67 schools. There were 68 schools that got coaching only, so they didn't get the SMT training. And then the materials and training went to 122 schools. So everybody got the materials and the training. And that included the lesson plan. So it was a daily lesson plan that the teachers had to follow. The subject advisors who were supporting them were supported for all of the schools, and the training was provided. The coaching and the SMT was provided to a more limited group. Right, next slide. So essentially we had to do 3 evaluations. We did a design evaluation, which if people are interested in, we can speak more about, but essentially it looks at, is the theory of change, are the processes likely to end in the outcomes that we're looking for? A formative or midterm evaluation that was finished in March 2020. Then, of course, we were disrupted. And then the summative evaluation, which we literally finished last week. Next slide. So the evaluation timeline, we collected lots of data, and so we were in and out of the field, and we did things like coach shadowing and training observations, and we went into classrooms, we went into a sample of the schools. Next slide. What was really important about our type of evaluation is that we were always looking to triangulate our data. So we did everything from stakeholder interviews, teacher focus groups, classroom observations, classroom library assessment, workbook analysis, teacher survey, principal and SMT interviews. We did a data quality assessment. So we looked at the monitoring system that the RSP had set up, and we confirmed whether or not, so for example, if the RSP system said that the materials had been delivered to a school, we confirmed with using at the school level that the materials had actually been received. And we did coach shadowing. So that's face-to-face observation of coaches. Right. And then you get to the next slide. So essentially, in South Africa, they closed down the schools in March. And they kept saying, oh, they'll open soon, they'll open soon. But at a certain point, the project instructed the coaches to shift from coaching face-to-face, which they couldn't do because of COVID, to using WhatsApp. So they instructed all the coaches, start WhatsApp groups, start coaching, and then coaches started reporting to us that they were using WhatsApp to respond to questions, to send out activities and other education materials. And so there's a quote there. I have WhatsApp groups with my coaching teachers and this is the control schools teachers. I send them a message every day from Coach 9. So that's what happened in terms of the pivot. And so when we were actually going out into the field to find out how this WhatsApp thing was working, we did a teacher survey and we matched the teachers to their coach. So 17 teachers were in our sample who were getting support from Coach 1. And so we asked them, was the support you were getting through WhatsApp useful? And 16 of the 17 found that the WhatsApp is useful. However, RSP didn't collect any monitoring data. So they pivoted to doing this, but they didn't record it anywhere. How many messages that they were sending out, what types of messages, how the feedback was. They didn't have any monitoring data on the usefulness. And so therefore, we said, okay, we need to triangulate our data and figure out how this is going to work. So our COVID-19 pivot is what we're talking about today, doing this WhatsApp analysis to confirm, did they actually pivot? Was it actually effective? Did it fill in during this big gap for the COVID-19? Next slide. So we're going to pause for just a second about questions, and I'm going to ask Heather if there's anything we should mention.
Thanks, Jen. That was a nice introduction to the project. We don't have any questions so far, but I'd like to open up, if there's any questions you have so far about the project and the evaluation we did, please just pop them in the chat or the Q&A section now. Otherwise, we'll move on shortly. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to pass over to Mosa now to speak. Thank you very much.
A very good afternoon to everyone. My name is Musa, and I was the emergent evaluator on the research. I also think, before I get into my reflections, I think it's fitting that we're having this conversation in June month. You see, in South Africa, June is the youth month, and that is a very important moment in South African history, educationally as well, particularly so. And that is because in 1976, the youth of Soweto stood up and started an uprising against the enforcement of Bantu education system. This would essentially mean, amongst all other things, that Afrikaans would become the main medium of instruction, which also meant that home languages like isiSotho, isiXhosa, Tshivenda were relegated or ignored completely. We fast forward to modern day democracy, and we're still dealing with this legacy of unequal language education. It is not reaching the individual and the spaces or beyond the spaces that it needs to. RSP and its reading benchmarking objectives look at some of the complexities of how do we look at home language education in South Africa. If you'd like to look or read more about the work that we've done with reading benchmarks and RSP, kindly find the links to the report and the blog in our chat box. On behalf of ourselves here at gLOCAL, we wish you all an empowering youth month. So in the background of all that historical disadvantages and disparity, you have what I thought was a really sophisticated, planned and pioneering program, also interacting with a trying and challenged modern day basic education system. So those are some of the surrounding elements that exist, but here's what I learned during a process that was like a small piece of a much bigger project. So what I've learned is that two potential approaches to analyzing WhatsApp are possible. The first one is the pivoted approach versus the planned approach. Now, in the first approach, I'm sure all of us can relate to this one. When one pivots into uncertainty, a project, for instance. So it's when you plan a project for 100 breakable group of people, and one is welcomed with over 300 responses. Your project pivots into uncertainty and improvising. Or for instance, you started out one way, but because of some unforeseen circumstances, for the most part, you end up having to resort to other methods. You see, in the pivot approach, WhatsApp is phased in. Right? It wasn't the initial mode of communication or how the research had envisioned continuing and doing its work. So it's phased in here. And the research your evaluation objectives, they do not factor the data source in. So you might have thought it's going to be face-to-face, it's going to be on Facebook or somewhere else, but you didn't factor that I need to use WhatsApp. And with that comes a separate set of rules that we look forward to looking into with you. Here as well, the analytical evaluation questions for the data source are formulated on inspection. So what that means is that we allow the data to guide us as to what we can possibly ask from what is here, right in front of us. And we'll get more technical around that later. So the pivot approach is the first one. In the second approach, here, the project is planned out. I like to think of it as a blank canvas because you plan your project out, everything is clear and you have your tools in mind. You've had time to think about, okay, I like this platform and this is how it's going to be used. You incorporate it from the onset. The research objectives know exactly what you're going to do and it accounts for the data source, the device itself, and the questions are formulated in advance. The advantages of this are monumental, and we'll share more of that in other slides. Yes, in our what if section, we'll fill out our blank canvas. So how does one collect data on WhatsApp? And this was probably the most trying times of my time here at gLOCAL, using a device we use every single day in the most unconventional of ways. And I think that's the thing with the emerging world. It's forced us to look at the most mundane things, but think, okay, how do I get the most out of it? But I think the most important thing now is that we're all convening with a much better sense of certainty about how COVID affects the work that we're passionate about, right? We're able to learn the kinds of precautions to do all of that. So here, how would one collect data on WhatsApp? And that's what we needed to figure out. So in the pivoted approach, the data collection for the RSP program, conversations, as Jennifer said, they started in around October. just to let the participants, the coaches know, at least the coaches know, and to spread the message to the participants that this is what's happening. You know, clarity was given, explanations, you know, all those ethical and important questions were done around about that period. But the actual collecting of the data started from the 8th to the 18th of December. I started then basically having to go onto the phone, calling the coaches, finding out what was happening, if they received the message that we need the WhatsApp data from the phones. And this was a really difficult part of the process. So the coaches were requested to extract their WhatsApp media, as mentioned, roundabout in October again, and messages came in probably a few times, right, to let them know this is happening, a reminder it's happening, and how to do it. Okay, we let them know, please, from that device that you were given to work on the project, you have to export to 2 COLISA representatives. So, in the chat box, have you ever exported chats from WhatsApp? Let us know in the chat box. If not, we'll show you how shortly. You see, it's not so easy. And at first I took it for granted until I actually had to take the participants step by step as to how do we do this. The first and the most important thing is that devices are not the same, right? Softwares are not the same. So for Apple, and I found this out also recently myself, is that the export feature is just down there. I think you can either get in or out of the group. I'm an Android human being, so yeah. But the export chat for Apple is slightly different, and you have to find it right at the bottom and export from there. For Android, and I was fortunate enough to communicate with people who used Android. The export chat works like this. This was the messaging that was sent to the coaches, right? So some could follow, but with others, I had to then go step by step. So what you do if you're an Android user is that you go into the group, and then you will find the 3 dots on the top right of the screen, like those 3 dots over there. And then you will press more. And you'll find an option that says export chat. And this was a critical part of the process. Choose whether to export with or without media. You have to choose with media, because the attachments will tell you exactly the kind of content that was moving around, you know, just how people were interacting, not just in terms of formal documents, but it really gives you more leeway. So you want to attach your media. But of course, if your project objectives don't need that, you can just take the text and you can leave the media alone. What is the media? The media are all the file attachments that we'll discuss in the next slide. But here's also another important thing, is that when you attach with media, data costs go off, right? Your email becomes more expensive to send and to download. So that was also a challenge that I found with the coaches, that the attach with media was a slightly more expensive process, and so had to wait a bit more to get the chat. Speaking of the challenges, so in total we have 14 coaches, but I only managed to speak to 9 coaches, 2 head coaches, and I only got data from 1 head coach. And then we could have had a whole lot of groups, but I only managed to get the coaches to extract, or we only received 14 groups rather in total. And that was difficult because some coaches had already returned their phones to the project implementer, so they couldn't access the chats anymore. Other coaches had changed phones and lost their history. Another coach broke her phone. Another coach had thought they'd sent the right thing, but it turns out they didn't. It was actually still in the email inbox. Like they didn't hit send. Yeah, they didn't hit send. So it was still lingering somewhere around. I'd had to go step by step with the coaches. And that's the thing, that the disadvantages of pivoting is that one can almost sense that the collection wasn't sort of, planned or phased in, right? At least in the way that the project needed it to, right? So the pivoting, you have to just go with it and find as much information as you can, because you need the data. When claims are being made, you want to sort of see, okay, how do I evaluate this claim? Does it match up with the data and the results? All that. So it really was not easy to get that. And also, data is expensive in South Africa, the data plan, and we'll share more about it as we go through, but some networks are free. You can chat on WhatsApp for free, but the moment you attach files, as we did with the coaches to say attach with media, that is expensive. And if you attach other attachments like voice notes, all those things, that is expensive, right? So the process in and of itself was very much a pivoting data collection process. When we receive the data, so now that I've gotten the coaches to say, thank you very much for being on the phone with me, I received your email, here it is, right? It will land into your inbox this way. So what you're looking at is my inbox that I got from the coach. The first line that you see over there, it says WhatsApp chat with RSP coaches TXT. That's the TXT file that you want to analyze. And then the rest are the attachments, the media attachments that we'll get into a bit later. But the with media that I spoke to about that you want your coaches or your participants to attach. And then in the email, it'll just automatically say what file was sent to you. This is what it looks like when you receive the data. But the moment you right click and you save, you have the option of either saving the one file that you want or just saving everything all at once and putting it in one particular folder and everything is in there. So your TXT files, your PDF files, everything that you exported from the chat can land into one folder in one quick swipe, or you can just hit and save your file onto your desktop. So this is how the files look on your desktop. Now, when you open the file, so now that I've opened the file, I had to, okay, what am I looking at, right? I'd never worked with a TXT file before. I mean, I just gossip on WhatsApp. I don't analyze. So I had to think, what am I looking at here? So what you're looking at is on the far right of your corner, left of your corner, is the date in the order of year, month, and date. And then your timestamps in the middle row. And then on the last column, what you have are the text files or the messages that people have sent. Right on the top, the first line, if the file was created by the sender, you'll see you created group so-and-so. That's how you know the person sent you this file is the one who created the. So this is more or less what you see. Okay, so I was reading and reading and reading. This is really nice. Okay. Are there any questions before I continue, Heather?
Yes, Martha, thank you so much. I mean, everybody's obviously finding your session really interesting because the questions are coming in, and thanks, guys. Please keep them coming in. Some we will get to, so if you haven't had your question answered by a text or not answered now, that means that we're going to address it either in another section of the presentation or that another panelist will address it after we've spoken about those aspects. Our first question is from Laura. Thank you, Laura, for your question. So she says, how did you manage the ethics of using WhatsApp? So the information sharing in groups is not encrypted, but the one-on-one is. So where data is stored, etc. And if people shared sensitive data that we were maybe not meant to see. So do you maybe want to speak more about that one, Musa?
Thank you very much, Lauren, for that question. And that's the conundrum with pivoting, is that because the data source was not factored in, you do run the risk. So in the pivoting, we always, and we'll get to that slide later, but we always say an amendment to your ethics control, but also continuous consent, asking consent from the participants themselves, which is why the discussions were so important during the month of October and all the preceding discussions, to prepare and to ask, that this is going to happen. It was not necessarily the intention, but as the participant or the coach, can we have access to the data? Again, with pivoting, it's very difficult to fully dot T's and I's, but consultation and continuous consent can always be factored in to try and address that.
Thank you, Musa. We have another question from Ivan. So Ivan says, how did you match the media file with the text message? So you're talking about downloading different WhatsApps and images. How did you match these? Thanks.
That's a really great one. Yeah, thank you very much for that question, Isaac. So I'm going to share the woes of that process in the next slide, actually, because that's the analysis stage. Hiva, shall we move on to the analysis stage, or would I look at another question?
Let's move on to analysis, and if anything's not covered by what you discuss in an analysis, we'll take some more questions. Thanks everybody for your questions. Keep them coming.
All right, so I've gotten the data, I've called around, and I've spoken to the coaches. My data is in all the relative folders, right? I collected last year, but now the analysis needs to continue. What's the process? I wasn't sure how this was going to work. So the research team came together in hopes of trying to understand what is the quality of coaching, or what was the quality of coaching like during lockdown, okay? Because that was the overall assessment here. They said coaching had taken place, so we want to see, okay, how did it look, okay? Now, using WhatsApp data, what are we going to look at? So the research team came together on inspection. What we could find, remember, was we can see the date, when the group was created. Why do we need the date? Well, that will tell us, was it really during lockdown period in South Africa, which was in April until around about July, August, July, when schools were closed and there was no access into the schools, right? So date of commencement and end date. What are the conversations in the group and the dominant peaks? Because you want to assess what the movement is like, okay? You want to assess the atmosphere. What kind of multimedia was shared? The attachments we spoke about. Is there an influencer or a champion in the group? So the rules of social media still apply here, because an influencer is someone who's responsive, who's interactive, who's vibrant, well, not necessarily vibrant, but who's interactive and who engages frequently in the group. We cannot say that someone is an influencer if they don't respond. So that test was more of a frequency test. Which one of the participants, not the coaches, participates more, interacts more? What is the role of the coach? Describe the coaching style, right? Because we want to assess all these things, the quality of coaching during lockdown. How do the teachers respond to the group? Do they just say one word, or do they just, throw hands in the air and like, okay, noted? Or do they talk amongst themselves and actually forget there's a coach in the group, which is what, now and then would happen. And that's the kind of atmosphere you want. Or does the coach lead all the discussions and everyone keeps quiet? So you want to see what's in the group. What is the purpose of the group? Does it adhere to its objectives? Are they doing what they said they would do? Right? But when you pivot, and it was an unplanned platform, you don't often have the time to sit down and craft what you want your platform to look like. So, but you'll throw it out and say, okay, on inspection, what is the purpose? Does it adhere to its general objectives? How does the group respond to COVID-19 challenges and any other unique information? Because that was also important to us, to know that, okay, what can we see from how teachers interacted during lockdown, particularly on COVID-19 issue. So on inspection, that's the thing, again, about pivoting. All goes. You have to look at everything. because you don't want to miss anything. And that's what it entailed in practice. Reading every line, keeping up with the threads, looking out for all information, and analyzing the shared files, preferably in chronology. Not always possible, but we'll see how we can in some cases do that. And again, disadvantages of pivoting everything. You don't want to leave anything out. You want the data to guide you. So we were sleuthing and looking out for timestamps, okay? And we want to see, and again, why? To assess to look at the period of assessment, okay, during the lockdown period. And in some cases, we were able to do a comparison pre-COVID. So we could see that there was a change in the interactions, in the atmosphere, which is also a good way that one could use the WhatsApps to sort of determine all these different time frames, right? Using your timestamps. A thematic content and text analysis on the TXT files. So again, the files on WhatsApp, not really the files, but on WhatsApp, particularly people communicate informally. Most of the time in the groups, they would communicate in Setswana, right? And every now and then a few words would come through, a whole conversation, a whole, dialogue. So that was important, right? An analysis on that would take, a different approach. So you look out for your words, you look out for your discussions, you look out for your, what are the related or unique words you need to look out for, right? Of course, there is software to help you do this, but I think also because I appreciated the novelty of the process, that I wanted to sort of also see what was there, lest we miss anything. What is the tonality? Because you want to see whether the coach is formal or informal. What are the kinds of mediums shared? Right? So the attachments we spoke about, listening to voice notes, was it just TXT files and words? No PDF or any other circulated, right? Chronology isn't always possible because the date on which you save the file isn't always the date on which the file was sent. I don't know if that works out. So you might right click and save the file in December 2020, but it's not to say that in the group that's when it happened. So it makes the placing of the text and the file a bit tricky unless the attachment and the name of the file says clearly the date on the file. And I'll show you how it can be possible. How participants respond. Are they interactive, short, vibrant? How does the admin respond? Do they facilitate and encourage discussion, right? Do they create a culture? And does the group take on a life of its own? Because that will tell you about the coaching style. So here's an example that I got to, to work on and how I sort of also go about this process. You look on what you see right now is one of the groups, and it's pretty much the same one. On your far left side, you have your timestamps, your date, and then you have the name of the participants that have been striked through. I didn't share that with you in the previous slide. What I've striked through are the names of the participants, and this is important. Here's why. The name of your administrator will always show as the name in which they saved themselves on their phones, right? So there was a bit of impatience because I hadn't sort of, converted. I didn't save the names of the coaches on the file as coach 1 or coach 2, coach 3, because the coaches used their names. So you might want to flag this about the namings of the devices in which you let your administrators use for communication, right? Because you might find a very interesting name, Too Hot to Handle Created Group RSP. Nothing wrong with that, but you want to sort of safeguard around that by giving a separate device advisedly. So then what you're looking at then are the names. What happened is I would look at the dates. I saw when the group was created. It was created on the 29th of May in 2020. right? And I can see who had created it, and I see the coach communicates, and I see he or she's also doing a roll call of who had indicated or got or received the message of communication. Using emojis as a way to roll call is also a very interesting use of WhatsApp. So I see, okay, it's a fair combination of formal and informal. And I also see that the coach has attached files. So now I'm even more curious, what kind of files are these? I go and I find where I saved the coach and their files on my laptop. And here's the mediums that the coach shared. So these are the kinds of mediums that coaches can share within the group, or that this specific coach shared in that group. The first file over here is a VCF file, right? And the second is an IMG. These are the IMG files, images, and then PTT files all the way down, voice notes, an STK, a web page, and a TXT. We'll break them down in a few seconds. So now that I've seen how the coach communicates, I actually now have an opportunity to see what if the coach also sounds like that when they send their voice notes. And sure enough, that was the case. So that's just some of the ways in which you can analyze, okay, what was the coach saying? So the interesting thing about this, and we're talking about chronology, again, I saved the file in 2020, right? On the 18th of December. What helps me be able to place this file, or whichever of the files in context, are the dates, the name of the files, right? So that can help with chronology if the date on which you saved doesn't necessarily appear in the group. So then what happened? Well, I was invested. I was completely invested. And I realized that a lot was happening in the groups, right? Life was happening in these groups. And I just placed myself back to that time during COVID and when everything was very uncertain. And I found a lot of things. Coaches and teachers said hello to each other. Some, not all, and Jen will get into the numbers and the science of it all, but some would they'd say hello to one another. They'd wish each other happy Women's Days. They would make, jokes. They would share some of their materials and how they're going about the program. And sometimes I wish I could go back and just ask them and say, hi, listen, the magic is happening in your group now. Please support, because there was some great things and great magic happening there. And I think also, you think of a time when people needed someone to reach out to. And in some groups, what these groups actually was that, it gave them a community, it gave them somewhere to reach out to. So it was really over and above a humbling experience. At the end of it all, there was a group that also, they organized massages. So there were quotes, and I was really, amazed by it, and it was going to be an outing, and it just showed that there was a community that created a community beyond just a project. And for me, that was really uplifting to see. So again, these are the kinds of extensions that people are able to share. They share images, PDFs, STK files, web files. What are those, right? So your emojis, of course, you can use your emojis to always sort of either do roll call or however you choose, but you will find some emojis, a lot of emojis. It's a dynamic tool. So if you don't lay the rules of engagement, if you don't create your community rules, the community rules will create themselves, okay? So just bear that in mind. It's a very dynamic and fun tool. .vcf files, which are contact files, right? So if it's saved or transferred within the group as a name, you will see the name of the person and .vcf. So if it's more than one contact that was shared within the group, you'll see 4 contacts .vcf, right? And then there are ptt.opus files. Now, PTT files are voice notes. And so they also help because they are saved with their dates. Now, sometimes that doesn't happen, and then that will make placing the voice note with the text not so easy. right? So PTT, your voice notes, then your img.jpg files. Okay, so these are your images. Videos, they just came up. I saw them as file attachments, right? So they all just land there. And the only thing I see within the text is file attachment. And so that was a bit of a problem, but you'll also find in videos there. If you know about the extension for videos, please share that with us. And then your STK files, your web files. So an STK file a web file would be something they probably got from the internet and want to just share with everyone, or download it directly from the internet and want to share with everyone. And so again, not always easy to place unless they have a date. And then of course your .x and your .pdf files. And they look like your general blue and red icons as you will see them. So as I mentioned, your .vcf files, you'll always see the type here, right? In the third column, the icon will be there and it'll say .vcf. And then your images, your img files, right? Your JPEG files will always be there. And then your PTT files, should they decide to share those, right? So they'll be saved as Opus files, and those are your voice notes. And then of course your stk.web files, right? So those are your web files, your stk files. And then lastly, the txt file itself. So those are the forms of attachments and media that people tend to circulate within WhatsApp groups. Again, if the medium is expensive, if it's on not a non-zero rated site, as we will explain, attaching all of this is very expensive, right? And so sometimes it's not always easy to factor this in when you pivot. Also, you might want to have someone who's either familiar with the participants or the program to look at the files and the analysis. It makes it so much easier. It makes it even more enjoyable because you're able to follow the culture, you're able to follow the conversations, and it just makes the evaluation process much easier. Heather, are there any questions for me?
So many. I hope you're ready. So thank you, everybody. We're really glad that you're engaging with us, and thank you, Mosa, for your engaging presentation so far. The first question is from Lissetti, and Lissetti asks, do we assume that the emojis mean the same thing to the people because they're being interpreted differently? Which is a really interesting question. Thank you, Lissetti. Mosa, I don't know if you can shed some light as our resident emoji expert.
That's the thing with emojis. Yeah, we don't, right? So I could have said people look meh when in the beginning of the exercises, right? What looks meh might just look different to someone else, or, you know, they're very different, contextual, relative. That's the thing with emojis. Depends on how you feel, and that's very subjective. So generally, no. But here's how I would say. In the planned approach, it's much easier to then start saying which emoji means what, right? You can set up and say, okay, the right hand emoji means this, that, and you can create a new culture around your emojis when you plan it, because you're able to create the culture from scratch. But when you pivot, the culture already exists. And so you basically just have to get what is there and try and follow the analysis with the conversation and say, okay, this is more than likely to mean this or that, but also how much does the emoji or the meaning of the emoji count to the overall research objective? Also what you need to think about. You can focus on the text and sort of leave the emojis out in the pivot process, that's fine. But in the plan process, you can factor and plan out what your emojis mean. I hope that helps. Heather?
Thank you, Mosa. I think that covers that question, and thank you, Lissetti. So we have some technical questions that I'm hoping you can ask people as well, answer for people. And so an anonymous attendee has asked about the TXT file. When you downloaded it, was it comma separated and yours appeared nicely sorted? Could you shed some light on that and how you were able to sort that so that you could analyze it better? Thank you, Anonymous, for your question.
Thank you very much, Anonymous, for that question. That, unfortunately, I was saved by a very, very, very nice consultant who taught me about CSVing. So she will discuss that in the quantitative analysis part of the presentation.
Great, thank you so much. There's some other questions, and I'm just going to read out Eduardo's question. Eduardo says, one of the challenge in WhatsApp groups is the discipline of members. So people use it to send messages out of scope of the group. And this is actually similar to Sophie's question as well. And basically people are asking if you were able to filter out relevant messages, if so, how, and how were you able to look at the data so that you were only analyzing what was maybe expected or important to the group and not just, you know, the random memes that people were sending on the WhatsApp group.
Yeah. So you're going to have to break that down. What's the first one for me so I can go into it? The first one said?
So basically, in a WhatsApp group, there's lots of different information, sometimes relevant to the project or the group, sometimes maybe not irrelevant. Were you able to filter this data at all? If so, how?
Yes. So, well, I read almost all the groups, right? And that's because most of the groups only had like very short, like they were opened between October and December. And they only had like 7 people, right? So there's not really much to filter out. So there was just like a few groups where the information was that long, and then I had to sit down and say, okay. So I did. In that case, I did start from where the group was. I looked at, okay, who's this person? And I walked my way down and I read the messages, tried to understand, followed the mediums, went down back to the text, all that way, right? If something wasn't relevant, I just didn't flag it. I just left it out of the report. But here's the thing as well, guys. Yeah, my bosses didn't always trust the Cinnabon intern with the science. So we did run the things through software, okay? To just double check if everything and the suspicions that this person is seeing and the communities this person is alleging is true. So software is a really good thing to help you factor out, okay, if I'm looking for COVID, Atlas TI insert COVID, fine, then I can go to exactly where all the COVID passages were. That's great, but then you'll still have to apply. So I do say software will help you where to look, but you'll still need to look and factor those things out myself.
Thank you so much, Melissa. That also addresses a couple of other questions about the software we used. So just to clarify for some people, another one of our consultants, Carol, will address further software that we used for this analysis.
Yes.
But as Melissa has mentioned, we use Atlas TI as well as a bit of a manual process.
Yes.
Thank you, Melissa. So we have another question from Emily. Thank you, Emily. She says, how important, and this is really interesting, you know, we were looking at 14 coaches, 2 head coaches, and you were able to draw some comparisons and look at each of these WhatsApp groups, and like you say, live within them. But Emily wants to know, how important was it to be able to have those different chats that meant you could draw comparisons? I imagine Emily's asking, you know, what happens if you only have one WhatsApp group chat?
When you can't do that WhatsApp group chat, because the research objectives were, for this, at least what I was told, is what was the quality of coaching. You know, you can look at pre-COVID and then you can look during and post-COVID. That's also how I separated it for myself. So yes, you can make that comparison. That's if the person has created all those different groups. I mean, I think only 3 or 4 had those that one could sort of run a comparison of 2019 or pre-COVID, during COVID, and post-COVID. So you can plan it all out that way. I'm not sure if that answers the question, Heather.
I imagine it does. I mean, just to, if anybody, Jen or Carol, want to add to that, I think it also really just depends on the nature of your project and what you're trying to analyze.
What you're trying to
you know, so we were obviously trying to look at coaches individually and their interactions with teachers, but then also it was nice to be able to draw comparative analysis between coaches. But I think if your project didn't rely on that, you know, you would be able to do this if you just had one group chat and then, like Melissa was describing, analyze within the group.
in the group. And yes, I did, like they said, I did have those groups where there really wasn't anything pre-COVID. You just had something COVID and post-COVID, and it's a very short group. There's no comparison. But in the planned approach, you're able to say, okay, I can create comparisons between first term, second term. It doesn't always have to be between years. You can even say, okay, within the first month of meeting, I've planned it out this way, and this is what I'm looking for. Or you can look at things like how many participants joined between the period of this and that, to make a comparison of that, because you'll also see in the group who leaves and who stays, right? That's also something we forgot to highlight. So you'll see so-and-so has left, so-and-so has entered the group. So you can see all of these comparisons, and you can make them if you plan it. But when you pivot, everything and anything goes. You have to make the comparisons a bit, manually.
Great. Well, I mean, not so great for you because you were the one doing that, but thank you, Musa. So we still have a few questions, and we'll get to some more over text, what we can, but just for moving on purposes, we're going to take the last question from Lesedi for now, and we will try to respond to your other ones as we go along, or if time at the end. But Lesedi asks, and I'm not quite sure I understand this, but Lesedi asks, how is the media data transcribed? So obviously there is media, like in some cases, photographs and videos. Melissa, can you shed some light on that, please?
So when they say just describe what kind of medium is shared, because we weren't really going in depth with the types of mediums, the reason why you look at the medium is to also assess things like research objectives, right? So you want to see if maybe they were sharing lesson plans, for instance, even though it's not required per se, but if you see people sharing things like lesson plans and stuff, you see fidelity to the research objectives. You see an image floating around, you see, okay, maybe they're a bit more formal, right? So it depends on what you want to do with your mediums.
Great. Cool. Well, thank you, Musa. And thank you, everybody. Please keep these questions coming. Don't forget to tweet us your questions and to, tweet us your thoughts as well at gLOCAL and use the hashtag gLOCALEvil2021. It's at the bottom of all of our slides. So thank you, Musa. Moving on.
Okay, thank you very much, Heather. Thank you, everyone, for those questions. As my mind goes, I will also just remember a few things. So then lastly, they say to me, okay, Musa, now we need a quantitative analysis. Okay, so at this point, I had seen the messages, I'd read all of them, I'd followed some of them for 2 years, I was invested in them, and I loved all of them, but I was not about to count them. So that's the point at which I said, no, I am done emerging, I'm out, right? But then they told me about Carol, who's a quantitative analysis specialist, and then she took it over. Over to you, Carol.
Hi, everyone. After doing all the investigation and trying to find out what she could do with the quantitative part of the WhatsApp group, so Musa contacted me and find out if it's able to find out the number of participants per group, how often do people participate in the group, the frequency of the coaches participating, and the frequency of the influencers participating. So when I took the TXT file, the first thing I did is to try to observe the patterns in the TXT file. Musa, please, can you go to the next slide? So the first step when you're trying to quantify the WhatsApp data is to first of all try to convert the information in the TXT file into a table that can be used for analysis, be it in Excel or in any other software. This was well doable with Excel, but it required a lot of manipulation. So the option I chose for this project was Python, but you can as well do it with R or other packages or other softwares. So the first thing you realize is when you read the data into into the software, into Python specifically, the data will be split in 2 columns, where the first column will be having the date and the second column will be having every other information. So what you will also do is to try to split the second column into the timestamp, the authors or the person who sent the message, and the actual message. And you also consider labeling the columns accordingly. So if we go to the next slide, I will give you some steps on how this is done. So as you look at this slide, you can see very well that the date is separated by a comma from every other information. And like one of the participants highlighted, a TXT file is basically a comma separated file. So when we are reading it into Python or R or any other software, we are reading it as a CSV file. So that is why it's going to be read as 2 columns, because the only separation or the only difference in column is going to see will be indicated by the comma. So the date will be in the first column and the other information will be in the second column. Now, what is the strategy to extract the information? Like if you want to extract the timestamp, you will see that between the timestamp and the sender's name, you have dashes. So when you write your code, you make it in such a way that it extracts the information just before the dashes. So that will give you the timestamp. And when you want to extract the name, you will consider, after removing the timestamp from the initial column, you will need to look at what is the separator of the name from the text. If you look after every name that has been hidden, you will find that there is like a column before. So that will give you an indication of what to include in your code to separate your name from your text. So after doing that, you might consider to go for further cleaning, because now you will have your date, you will have your timestamp, you will have the name of the person that sent the information, and you will have the actual text. Can you please go to the next slide, Musa? So you will have something like this, where you actually have the date, the time, the text, and the actual name of the person. So after doing that, the text is not always clean, and you might want to do further analysis. Depending on what to do, you might consider using more cleaning steps. The first one might include standardizing your text, which involves converting everything into lowercase. The second one, next slide, Moza, please. So the second one, you might want to remove information that is not relevant for your analysis. That include when the group was created, when someone was added to the group, when someone left the group, when the message was deleted, as this will not be considered as an active contribution into the discussion. So you might also, depending on the which way you want to give the analysis, what you actually want to analyze, you might consider extracting more information from the date column, which includes the week, the exact week when the post was made, the month, the year. You might even want to extract the emojis, like what is being attached to the file that is shared, that was shared with Moza. You can actually get it from the TXT file as well, and try to find out the frequencies at which certain emojis are used in the group, and so on and so forth. So at a certain point, you might also, if you have to consider sharing this data with a third party, you have to consider anonymizing your data, because even if you have consent to access the information, it's not consent granted to the whole world, and there are certain information that people may not be qualified to access. So we have to maintain their confidentiality. So what we did was we created a new column where each coach or each phone number was assigned a coach. So maybe let's say if I was one of the coach, I'm Carol, maybe the Carol will be translated into coach 1. Moza will be translated into coach 2. So at the end of the day, what will happen is I will have a map that I keep with the actual name of the coaches and the pseudonym that were assigned to various coaches. And the data that is shared is now anonymized. We have de-identified all the information, and we can now share it with any analyst that will want to look at the data. And also other things that were not done for this project, probably because of the multi-language setup that we have in South Africa, is standardizing the language, because that could be done as well, where you have to like standardize the language. You have to remove stop word. Can you please go to the next slide, Musa? Thank you. So what you have to do, you like convert, because if you want to do a type of text analysis and produce things like word cloud, you have to standardize your text and make sure you remove most of the information that is not useful. So you want to convert everything to lowercase, you take out all your punctuations, you remove stop words such as and, so, and then you can also proceed with stemming and lemmatization. As you see on the table, when you have a word, maybe let's say information, when you are doing stemming, you bring it down to the base form, which in this case will be inform. And when you're doing lemmatization, it will be information. But if you have something, let's say in the plural form like computers, if you do the stemming, it will bring it down to compute. And if you do lemmatization, it will bring it down to computer. So it's removing the S from the computers and bringing it to computer. The importance of this is when you're doing a word cloud, you want to find out which are the dominant words that are being used in a specific group. But if you just, if you don't do this stemming and this lemmatization, the tendency is what is going to happen is that the different variations are going to tone down certain words that are being used in the group. So it's essential to bring it down to either the base form or you use lemmatization. Next slide, please. So after doing that, you now have a clean table with all the columns and rows that you want to run your analysis on. You can now run graphs or tables to find out the number of messages that were sent by either specific persons or the rate of conversation in the group on a weekly, monthly, or yearly basis. You can even do a word count to find out, okay, how, what is the average number of words that were being used in specific groups, where they're like few talkers, how often did they share documents, how was the daily conversation, and you can even have a word cloud that will tell you what was mostly discussed in that specific group. As I explained earlier, it was a little bit difficult to produce that in our context because it was, South Africa is a country with more than one national language, which is not always included in the packages that are developed for analysis or for natural language processing. And hopefully over time, when these packages are developed, it will take into consideration the contextual setup of various countries. So after doing that and structuring your WhatsApp data into structured tables, I think the sky is the limit in terms of the quantitative analysis we can get from them. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Carol, for that that session on quantitative analysis, and I think you really helped explain the statistics and the Python, even for those of us that aren't familiar with that software at all. I'm just going to ask the group, there's no questions at the moment specific to Carol, but does anybody have questions for Carol, or questions about the software and the analysis that she ran thus far? Great, thank you, Isabella, for saying we've got such a clear presentation, very informative. Thank you. Great. Okay, I'm just scrolling up through some of these other questions. Great, so if there's no other questions for Carol, I think we can move on, and then we can take some of these final questions. Thanks, Carol.
Right, so it's back to me, and I will be providing you with the results. Let's go to the next slide. So the first, oh dear, something's gone wrong with our slide. All right, so altogether, we had 14 different groups and 365 participants, exchanging 4,693 messages. So I'm sorry it's so small. It wasn't so small earlier. But anyway, you can see that on the right-hand side, Coach 1, which on all of our different metrics was one of our, there we go, that's better. Coach 1 on all of our different metrics had 92 participants. And Coach 9, who is also one of our excellent coaches, we had 4 coaches who really performed well on all the different rubrics. The number of participants, though, was a bit disturbing because at the end of the day, they were supposed to have between 50 and 55 teachers that they were coaching, and they had 92 and 71. And if you remember back to the quote that we started with, the coach mentioned that they had included their teachers that were not part of the coaching or SMT group, but were also part of the LTSM or the materials group. So essentially, these 2 coaches were providing the same sort of resources to the teachers who were supposed to be in the comparison group on the RCT. So all very good. And in South Africa, social justice and inclusion is the name of the game, but this resulted in contamination. But you can see that not everybody had, so Coach 3 had 35, so about half the number of coaches. Coach 17 had about 29. Coach 10 did a different strategy. They had a grade 1, grade 2, and grade 3 group. So if you add them together, you can see that they had the right number. Coach 16 did primary schools. They had, each of the schools coaches should have had between 5 and 10 schools. So we got 3 of their groups, but the group sizes really varied to less than 10 people on their group size. There were 2 of those. 10 to 20, there were 6, 21 to 30, there were 3, and greater than 30, there were 3. So you can see that without the guidance provided by the project to the coaches, you had huge variation amongst the groups. So if you go to the next slide. So here you can see how many of the coach messages. So in the third column is the total number of messages in that group. Once again, Coach 1 had 2,147, and that coach provided 26% of the messages, which is good, 552. And there was an influencer who came in who was 302 messages. So if you're thinking about a project, why is knowing who your influencer amongst your group important? Well, if one follows up with this project, with another project, one might want to say, okay, this influencer is somebody that we want to get on board. In particular, we want to make sure that we give them extra data so that they can carry on and help with the dialogue. They can be a peer support person. They can help in other ways to get the coach going. And so you can see that it really varied, you know, influencer messages down to 11 from Coach 16, and, you know, so it was a big difference. So let's go to the next slide. So here's an example of one of the messages. This is coach one. As we know, that coach gave us lots of messages. You're busy with the assessment, so it's a motivational, telling you and reminding you that I might pop in, and that they needed to cover their informal activities and curriculum coverage. So this is some evidence that there was some sort of coaching activities going on. Next slide. Again, coach one is, this is during the holiday, talking about organizing reading competitions. So this was before lockdown. English drama competitions, you choose a book. The whole idea is to get the culture of reading going on. So some of the other evidence that we gathered during this evaluation had to do with how much writing the learners were doing in workbooks. And in some cases, the learners were writing maybe one sentence a day. So you can see that we need to build the culture of reading and writing in these low-income schools. So, and as you can also see Musa's comment that they went back and forth between English and Setswana. So if we had just gone with the interview data and with what the teachers said in the surveys, the coaches would have said, oh yeah, we support everybody by WhatsApp. But what does support mean? And this is what we were able to establish by doing this process. We didn't do as formal a comparison as I think one of the participants questioned just now. We instead were looking for evidence that fit coaches into three different categories: a strong coach or an excellent coach, an average coach who had some issues that they needed to resolve, and to weak coaches. But there were some other strategies that were tried. For example, calling teachers, which apparently didn't go over well at all. And as somebody also had asked, the cost of data became an issue. And it's one of the things when we were doing the analysis of the cost data of the project, we pointed out that they really the project should have provided data to the participants. Because if you're sharing resources, that's when you need data to be able to download it. It's all different if you're just having a dialogue. And in terms of the question about the photos and the images, we didn't do as much analysis of that because, again, this was kind of a sideline just to validate whether or not the pivot actually happened or not. But in another case in the Eastern Cape where some WhatsApp data was done, there was extensive image analysis because this was in a grade kindergarten or grade R project, and they were looking at the different photographs of the teachers teaching the learners, and there was lots of sharing of these photographs. And in that case, the analysis was done. And if you want to read about how to do photo analysis, we do have a blog on COLISA's website, www.colisa.com. Right, let's go to the next slide. So we are back to questions. So Heather, any questions?
Great, thanks, Jen. And I'll send a link to that blog that Jen's referring to now in the chat. We've got a question from Abbott. Abbott says, how do you determine, and this is the great question, not really what this evaluation was trying to do, but Jen can definitely shed some light onto this. How do you determine if the WhatsApp messages changed or influenced learners?
So fortunately, this evaluation had to do with both, had also an impact evaluation element. So we are due to go into the field in now August, I believe, to collect learner data. And we're going to test a whole bunch of these learners. And so there'll be some cross-tabbing and checking to see if this actually makes a difference. But the bottom line is, did the coaching make a difference to what we expected to happen in the field? And our evaluation, which is a very long 120-page report, has essentially concluded that the program was not implemented with enough fidelity to see that difference. So we'll be using the data to look at that question that you've asked, but also to triangulate what sort of learning losses we're seeing, because we have data that goes back to 2018 and then 2016 with the same cohort of learners in the same grades. And in these cases, we'll also be looking longitudinally at learners that were tested originally in grade 1 who are now in grade 6 or 7.
Great, thanks, Jen. There's 2 more questions, and I don't know if you'd like to address them or if we'd like to bring Mossa back. But one of the questions is about how do we deal with deleted messages, or messages that might have been deleted by participants. And thank you, Sharanya, for that question. And then this is a question that we can't ensure, but how can we ensure from our observations that every group is comparable with each other? So each WhatsApp group or coach may have their own style of conversation. For example, how do we ensure that materials haven't been shared over email in one of the groups?
So we were able to ascertain quite early on that teachers didn't use email at all. And it was something that we checked with the project, we checked with the coaches. So email was not one of the resources used with this particular group of teachers. They tend to all have smartphones. They tend to use those smartphones as essentially their computer. So that's the one thing. We were not trying to compare the groups to each other. We were trying to compare the groups against essentially the project benchmark. Were they meeting the benchmark or weren't they? So the strategy that the project had put forth is that the coaches will be sending motivational, they'll be sending resources, they'll be telling people how to use those resources. And we were looking at that. Did they or didn't they? Within the larger thing. And so this was just one tiny element. This was not the main methodology. And Heather, you can actually speak about some of the other issues or items that we looked at in the rubric of the coaches, because you did that analysis.
Yeah, so as Mossa said, we all lived within different parts of this project, also within the WhatsApp groups, myself within what we were doing with coaching case studies. And just on what we're discussing, Jen, I'd like to say as well that, and this is pointed out by a colleague of ours, to kind of emphasize, and this also speaks to your question, Sharanya, that part of the point was that these WhatsApp groups weren't comparable. So some coaches were, had better relationships with their teachers and were stronger coaches than others. And so some WhatsApp groups, for example, had been started at the beginning of the project because the coach thought, okay, great, this is how I'm going to communicate with my teachers and have a really good relationship with them. And then some coaches only started the WhatsApp group after the project had to pivot. So that was also a comparable and an interesting element of that. But what we did as well, so like Jen mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, one of the interventions was coaching. So with the coaches, we also shadowed all of the coaches for 2 days. We developed case studies about the coaches. We looked at a rubric for how they interacted with the teachers, how organized they were, the kinds of comments that they made in feedback sessions. So really, like Jen said, this WhatsApp analysis of their groups, and again, the groups that we could get was just one element of describing the coach's relationship with their specific teachers. Cool. So thanks, Jen. And then our last question so far is in a group which had, Jen, you've spoken about the influencers, so maybe this relates. So there's interaction obviously between a coach and the teachers. Can you see whether all the teachers interacted, or was it possible that some didn't respond via WhatsApp or might have responded individually? And to what extent did we consider this in our analysis?
We didn't consider that at all. We did look at, as we showed in the infographic, the number of participants and how much the images were, and you could actually see that some participants in groups didn't ever respond at all. But because this wasn't central to everything that we were doing, instead it was kind of an innovative process that we were putting in place, that was a little bit less interesting. Although certainly is indicative of buy-in to the project and whether or not the teachers were actually engaged. And there were many teachers who didn't engage at all.
Yeah, indeed, unfortunately. But I guess also that speaks to, again, if your coach is able to get maybe the more shy teachers to engage, or all your teachers to engage, that also speaks to the relationship with the coach and the teachers. We have another question from Anonymous, that could there be a surprise outcome or any unintended consequences of this pivot to WhatsApp?
I think it showed that the project itself hadn't understood that it was part of a randomized control trial. And that is a typical issue that you often have with project designers and managers of a project, where they think that they're being very clear about what the theory of change is. And the fact that the best coaches actually engaged with the control group with the same amount of enthusiasm as they engaged with their coaching, the people that they were coaching, showed us that the communications and that the process on the ground of understanding what was going on and what was supposed to happen in terms of the theory of change and the fidelity that the project was supposed to be following just wasn't there. And so if we had done this analysis earlier, we might have discovered that earlier, and maybe during the formative evaluation, and they might have been able to course correct even more. But it was distressing to find out that the project managers themselves hadn't picked this up, that we as the evaluators had to pick it up.
Right, thank you, Jen. There's a couple more questions that we'll just answer over text, but for now I think we can move on with the presentation. But please do keep your questions coming. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jen and Heather, for the results. Like I said, you can think one thing, but the science will always ground you to let you know that, yeah, things don't always look as they do in the groups. So just a quick recap. We've learned more about the project, the RSP project. We learned more about the possible approaches to analysis. We learned about the strategies we took for qualitative analysis, the questions that we used to guide us. We also looked at some of the challenges that we experienced as a result of the pivoting to WhatsApp. We looked at some of the stories, and we looked at the attachments that people are able to send through WhatsApp currently, and the messaging that happens and what you can look out for and how to analyze that. We also looked at quantitative analysis and the steps to quantitative analysis and what you can do. So now that we've covered the pivoting part of the program, we move on to the planned approach. We fill in our blank canvas, as I say. So this is the part where, for instance, you have received funding and you know what has happened in the past, but now you want to think about how can I incorporate WhatsApp into my project ahead or in preparation of evaluation. What do I need to think about? So what if, also, and that phrased differently, what if this project had been sort of around the planned approach? What are the considerations we need to think about? And in the last decade of our evaluations, when many of the STG programs were initiated, and conceptualized before COVID, we've had to pivot to many uncertainties. So how do we plan around that? What if we could plan? Okay. So in the planned approach, the project here is planned with the tools in mind. WhatsApp is incorporated from the onset. Your evaluator is co-administrator on the WhatsApp groups, eliminating the need to ask others to download your data. So remember when I said that it was difficult to get the data, because in some cases I had to reach over the coach who lost the phone, but was able to connect us with the influencer, the teacher, the participant, in which case another conversation is needed to ask for permission, consent, and then take the process. But in this approach, you already have someone in the group. They are part of the group when it starts, and they can continue. Objectives account for the data source. Your research objectives knows exactly that, okay, in this program, we are going to be using WhatsApp to monitor well-being, to monitor communication, how exactly you plan to use and why. Are you using WhatsApp for the right platform, for the right people also? We need to think about that. Questions here are formulated beforehand. So you get to think around how you're going to support, where, and why. So what to consider? Will it assist our program objectives? Again, does it help us? Usage and technical supports. Are participants techno-savvy? So we met the coach who prefers to use voice notes to communicate. I know I also prefer to use voice notes, especially for complex conversations. I'm too lazy to text sometimes. So you want to explain this very calmly and the person can listen to it over and over again. That's also a great way to learn. But does your project factor that in? Does it support not just the people or your evaluators and your administrators, but your participants? Can you plan for their data, right? Who is your administrator? The rules of engagement. This is also very important because it's about creating a safe community within your WhatsApp. You see, this is probably the most delicate conversation you'll have with your participants. The granular, the better. So what to consider when planning again? Point number 2, your legal and ethical considerations. NB. Because the protection of personal information is really contentious all over the world. People want to protect the information. They want to know that you'll respect and you'll treat it with integrity. You won't pass it off to third parties. You know, am I safe? What do I know what is happening with the information in this group? So you want to speak to your participants. You want to also, first of all, acquaint yourself with the policies of your country. So for instance, in some countries, WhatsApp, you know, is not allowed nationally, you know, so you want to acquaint yourself with what is possible, what is not, right? It's not just saying we're going to use WhatsApp when you speak to your participants. You have to explain that we're going to use it, there'll be third parties involved, and at the end of that process, the data will be extracted for research and evaluation purposes, so that they know exactly it's specific, but most importantly, that they're not tied to it as well, because consent also needs to be reversible, right? Make sure ethical clearance accounts for the source beforehand. Make sure that your research plan and objectives and everything else has WhatsApp written down as one of your sources. So what happens in a situation where Musa is part of the program and she says, right, I'm done, I'm out. I have no desire to be a part of this. Please remove my messages. What do you do as an evaluator? We say the strike through method. So this is essentially where you will find Musa's name in the group and you will find her name and all the information and all her messages, and you'll strike her through, right? In this particular case, I did not strike one individual. These are participants, right? But you would essentially do this for that one individual and not consider their information and contribution for the purposes of evaluation. It makes evaluation, it throws it a bit off, but it respects your participants' vision. So that's one way to look around. If someone says later on, I said yes, but I've changed my mind. We also prepared an example of what a consent form looks like for your participants. If you're interested in that, that can be attached with all the other resources with the presentation. So what to consider when planning? Data collection in the planning process is a lot easier, way more seamless, because why? You've planned it in your research objectives. So it's not just saying I'm going to use it and this, you're able to say, okay, once the data has been used, first of all, I've been able to plan how I use it. I've been able to plan the activities. I've been able to plan the conversations and the keywords that will guide my analysis and what it is we are trying to work through in our research. You've thought about all these things. So come data collection, it will be very easy because your administrator is already at hand. You know that by the month of June or November or whenever, the extraction process starts. I don't have to consult participants because I've received consent. Now I just talk to my administrators or my evaluators. So you know exactly what you're getting and where you're going to get it. what to consider in planning. And for the analysis, your software, you can never go wrong. But as Carol said, in South Africa and in Africa as well, I think generally, the software doesn't take cognizance of the complexities of our language, the diversity and the range, all those things, right? So the software can tell you how to spot COVID, right? But what about Batlisiso, Simongwana? Those are phrases that exist in South African language, not necessarily as easy. So for the analysis, again, you want to try and make sure that you have someone who understands the project and participants. But yes, please love your interns. Use the software, and make the process a bit more easier for them. Heather, are there any questions as we have planned our WhatsApp group?
Yes, Mosa, there are. Surprise, surprise. But thank you, everybody. We're loving this engagement. Thank you for engaging with us on Twitter. It's virtual, but it's been really engaging. So thank you. So we have a question from Natalia, who says, and I mean, my gut answer is definitely, but so could the presence of an evaluator as a co-administrator of this WhatsApp group impact how the participants interact in the group? So if so, which almost certainly, what suggestions do you have for limiting this impact?
So for co-evaluators, that was also my concern. I mean, as an emerging evaluator, I thought that, would this be a problem? But you can make them a silent participant. They don't have to say anything. They can just be there, okay? And this is just to safeguard in the event that the administrator who will probably be a participant of the program as an administrator. If they, for instance, should say, okay, I don't want to head this part up, and then we still have an evaluator who can extract. So I think it's just how you have this conversation and why it's so delicate is that you explain who exactly is in the group and what their role is. So the moment they see that, no, this person will probably not even comment anything at all, and the person who's in charge of the group can lead conversations and make sure that everyone feels safe enough to communicate, I think you can work around that. It just depends on how open and transparent you are with your participants around who and why you're using the data.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Mosa. And it goes back to exactly what you're saying about informed consent upfront. So yeah, thank you, Natalia, for your question as well. We have another question from Robert. So Robert is saying that this conversation is assuming an intervention, such as where someone or an evaluator has some kind of control or authority on the WhatsApp group's uses. So definitely, I mean, this evaluation was about coaching WhatsApp groups and also how to use WhatsApp groups planned for the data from WhatsApp groups for future evaluations. So then Robert goes on to ask, how about open WhatsApp groups such as selling groups? He's wondering how we could possibly ethically handle large and diverse groups where there's no natural leader and why or how we might evaluate it.
Yeah, I think it goes back to your planning. So if your project needs 100 people in a group, I'm not sure what the maximum, I think max is 50 participants in a group, right? In one group. But if you want to take it to the max, I think it really just depends on the kind of culture you create and your program create. You see, like I said, the rules of engagement for WhatsApp, how I've seen it is that they're already there. But you can also create your own depending on how you design. So you can have all of those people in the group, but you just need to plan how they're going to engage, what they're going to say, what the content is, what the rules are for all of them. So if you plan it out well, I don't think it should be a problem. But again, acquaint yourself with the laws, ethical clearance, and always just speak to your people. But I always say, try and limit the amount of people in the group, right? Why 100 when you can just do 50? But if your research needs it, it is possible. It goes to how well and detailed you plan it.
Great, thank you, Mosa. Thanks everybody for the questions. We'll be moving on to our final few slides now. And please do continue engaging with us on Twitter if there's any remaining questions, and we can continue this conversation.
Thank you, everybody. So we're going to conclude with a quick evaluator checklist. So if you're going to use WhatsApp Is it aligned to your objectives? Is there technical support? What are the community rules? I mean, one of the issues that will come up is somebody gets bullied on a group, or somebody posts inappropriate content. Those are all things that you need to be aware of. Protecting personal information, most has spoken about that. Make sure you identify the administrator, and the co-administrator could be an evaluator. This eliminates a whole problem that we had in this particular case of downloading the chats. Because if you are a co-administrator, then you can download the chats very easily. You need to think about how often you're going to download the chat. So if you're a developmental evaluator, you might want to be downloading it on a weekly basis or a monthly basis, and therefore doing the analysis and providing rapid feedback to your program or project that you're evaluating. Conducting the analysis and designating the results. Then, on the next slide, if you're setting it up as a project or a program, not from the point of view as an evaluator, but you want to use WhatsApp, just telling colleagues to set up a WhatsApp group is just insufficient. That's our evaluation showed that very clearly. So the leaders of the project said, guys, start WhatsApp groups, start coaching on WhatsApp. They just didn't give enough guidance. And they need to also provide guidance on the rules of engagement. So how often should coaches be posting? What sorts of things should they be posting? What is acceptable for participants to say in the group or not to say? Make sure you have the consent and privacy. Decide if, and this is, I think it was a question earlier, if participants can be given data to post and receive resources, or, and in South Africa, we have something called zero-rated websites, where it doesn't take data. If the resources can be posted onto a website and instead you're just sending out a link, that means that you can't necessarily see, you have to look at that website, how often that data is downloaded. So it's a different process. But it was a huge issue that participants didn't have enough data. Make sure that you're sharing the resources and posts. And so the head coach didn't, in this particular case, model the kind of coaching WhatsApp that one would have hoped. You might want to identify the influencers to engage further. I spoke about that Eastern Cape project. They were able to identify out of the 100 teachers who were on the WhatsApp group, 5 teachers who were definitely influencers. And so the subsequent project actually engaged those teachers very deeply to be coaching their colleagues. And that was a very interesting development. If it is an important intervention and you really want to know that the coaches are WhatsApping, you need to set up some sort of monitoring system. It was a huge gap. So essentially in the 4 months that the coaches were supposed to be doing virtual coaching, there was no monitoring data gathered at all. So there was nothing saying that this engagement was happening. And then incorporating your results into your data-driven decision-making. So like always, we want to make sure our feedback loops are covered. So that takes us to 4 o'clock. I think there's one more slide, and then I think we're done. This is essentially some of the reports, and I do believe that that you've put it into the Q&A as well in the chat, where people can download the reports.
Absolutely. So the direct links are in the chat.
Okay. Thank you all for participating, and for those who've managed to stay the full 2 hours, we really, really appreciate your participation, and thank you very much.